What if you took the idea that every question you got wrong was an opportunity to learn something new?
I feel liberated, actually. I know that sounds extreme, but I feel absolutely liberated. Yeah, I'm going to take that mindset. I'm going to switch it and say, that's my thought process now.
I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally raised my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, I coached several of my students on their biggest LSAT challenges and did my best to make my answers to them as concrete and tactical as possible, so you can take those insights and apply them to your LSAT prep for a quick score boost. Here are the best moments from those coaching calls.
I've been struggling a bit with the reading comp section. It's just consistently been the weakest area. Am I wasting too much time taking notes? Am I not spending enough time on the questions? Or am I not grasping what the passage is about when I'm reading it under the time constraint?
I remember during the group coaching call, you mentioned that, and I had this idea for you about what if you could find some middle ground where you weren't taking as many notes as you do right now, but you develop a system where you're taking enough notes to help you recall and feel like you have a good handle on the situation.
So how would you suggest I do that?
Ultimately, you'll have to adapt any note-taking system to your own situation, whatever makes you feel most comfortable adapting the material in the passage. Given what you're doing right now, it sounds like you were taking a lot of notes. I think you even mentioned that not all of them were useful to you in answering the questions. Is that correct?
None of them are.
None of them.
I never look back at them.
What is it about taking these notes that makes you feel like you're gaining something in the moment that you're writing them down?
I don't take notes on every single one of the passages, but I guess I start writing down notes when I feel like I'm going to struggle with the rest of the passage if I don't. So if it's maybe a topic that's unfamiliar, or if the language is a bit tough to grasp, then I will take those notes. And also the notes just help me think what's the author's attitude, what the viewpoint is better than I would without the notes.
Okay, so how would you describe the author's attitude in a given passage? Can you give me an example of what you might write down to capture that idea?
I would pretty much just say AA. So if it's the first, say, paragraph in the reading comp that has the author's attitude, I'd just say 1 AA in my notes. But if it's something really complicated that it took me a couple seconds to understand, I'll write it down, probably because I think I'll forget it if I don't. This was the first passage. It just took a lot out of me to write it down. And then I noticed that I just started taking lesser and lesser notes for the rest of them because I felt like the time's running out.
The notes that you're taking earlier on the easier passages are actually costing you time from the tougher passages where you need them.
But I also don't know which passage is going to be tougher. They're not arranged in the order of difficulty. I don't think so.
Not a strict order of difficulty, no, but I think it's typically the case that the first passage will not be the toughest and the fourth will not be the easiest. And upon a quick glance of the passage, you could probably get a sense of how complex it is, especially if your level of comfort with the topic or the vocabulary used is greater or lesser.
The score fluctuates, and I feel like the most fluctuation comes from the fact that I'm not scoring well in the reading comp. And I've also noticed that the better I get at the reading comp, I also get better at the logical reasoning. So do you just think I should maybe give up on improving the reading comp and just make sure that I near perfect all the other sections?
I would never suggest that you give up on anything.
Yeah.
There is still experimentation and work to do for you on reading comprehension in terms of finding a balance with the note-taking, where you could take a little bit fewer notes on the first passage and save more time to even things out with the later passages. So can you find an average of what the level of note-taking is right for you to process the information? And for many people, I would say, don't write down anything at all or keep it really minimal. But I also recognize that different people process information differently. Some people, their books are full of highlights and no underlines, right? And I imagine you're falling into that category, perhaps.
Yeah.
And other folks keep their books pristine.
Yeah.
Others will put little tags and Post-its on them. Others will keep everything in a journal. Everybody's different. So I don't want to tell you to radically alter your reading comprehension approach at this point in your life with the LSAT a month and a half away. I think I just want you to moderate it a little bit so that passage 1 doesn't have all the notes and passage 4 has hardly anything, because passage 4 probably needs the notes more than passage 1 does. Just like you wouldn't take notes for Clifford the Big Red Dog book, but you would take notes for quantum physics, right?
This situation comes up more than you'd expect, taking detailed notes during reading comp, but then realizing too late that all that note-taking is eating into your time. What happens is this: the first passage feels comfortable, so you take your time. Maybe even overdo it on your notes, but then, by the time you get to passage 3 or 4, the ones that actually need more time, you're rushing or you're guessing. Reading comp isn't about being thorough on every single passage. It's about being strategic. You've got to budget your time. So instead of writing down everything, focus on structure and key transition words. What is the author doing in each paragraph? Where do they shift their tone? And what role does a particular analogy serve? The more intentional you are with where and how you take your notes, the more time you'll have to think critically when it really counts.
Should I be always doing time passages from now to the LSAT? Because I can score well when there's no timer ticking.
Well, a couple of things you could do. I mean, one approach would be time everything, because the LSAT's a month and a half away. And you want to work on the pacing and the endurance. And I think for you especially, a lot of your difficulty with the LSAT is the pacing, where you're running out of time because of taking too many notes on certain passages, not enough on others. Another approach you could take would be to time it initially pretty strict and then review in depth untimed. And I would certainly recommend doing that as you have been doing.
Yeah.
Another approach you could mix in there would be to, let's say you have an average of 845 per passage, of course, 35 in a section, but not all passages are of equal difficulty. So for that reason, I would say maybe give yourself 40 minutes for the section and then aim to reduce it gradually down to 35.
Sure.
And ideally for a top score, down to 33-ish, so you have a buffer. I always love my students to complete the LSAT sections with a little bit of a buffer, just a minute or two for safety. And then also so that you have a little bit of time to review something tough that you may have wanted to return to. Logical reasoning, especially to have that buffer to go back, that time bank to tackle the toughest ones you may have flagged, I think is really useful to start building in. And in this final 6 weeks or so, I think that's where you want to be thinking about things like the pacing, the endurance, how you allocate your time over the course of the section. Because at this point, I think you already have a pretty good foundation in the ins and outs of the LSAT, the various question types and such. So for you, I think pacing is really key right now.
There comes a moment in every student's prep when they'll say to me, when I have enough time, I get it. But when I'm under pressure, I miss 2 to 3 more questions. If that's happening for you, it means your accuracy is ahead of your pacing, which is actually great news. It means you've got the understanding. You just haven't built the test day rhythm yet. The fix is to build reading comp timing drills into your weekly study schedule. You do 3 passages in 27 minutes, 4 passages in 35 minutes to simulate the real deal. And most importantly, you want to review what messed up your timing. Was it one passage in particular that went on too long? A particular question that derailed you? Or were you just fatigued? You want to treat timing like a skill, because if you train for it, like you train by question type, your score will start to rise without needing to speed read or memorize more.
I'm kind of a little bit confused on how to do something, and I don't know if you maybe have a different way of doing it that I could use. So when it comes to necessary assumption questions, you read over the paragraph, get a good understanding of what the paragraph is stating, and then go through the answer choices. Well, you believe that this is the case, and you state whatever answer choice A lists. And then you as the presenter say, no, I don't believe that. And obviously you're going to make all of them into no, but whatever sounds like a lie is the one you go with. And that's really hard for me to do because I don't always know which one will sound like a lie. I don't know if there's a different way of doing that to where it's more definite of a way of figuring it out.
The correct choice when negated will destroy the argument. So if that choice when negated seems like a lie, given the information in the stimulus, then it could not possibly work.
I understand what you're saying. I guess I would just need to really get a great understanding of what the stimulus is stating so that I can identify what sounds like a lie. I know there's still months until the LSAT, but it's just the time that it takes to do that. I just thought maybe there was a different way to do it.
Well, there's never going to be shortcuts. I mean, this is hard. If it were easy, everybody would get top scores, right? Theoretically, or the curve would be crazy. The point is that you don't have to do this for every single question, but for the toughest problems you encounter, it's worth slowing down and engaging in this process. For example, when I work with students, I'll have them send me the 3 to 5 hardest problems they've recently encountered, along with photos of their diagrams and notes and their review process. And part of that review process is articulating it, explaining it in their own words. Not for everything, but for the toughest ones, it's worth doing. And if you really want to get in depth with your review, let's say you do a practice test for every question you get wrong, and then all the ones that give you trouble, that could be 20 or 25 questions. This could take hours. But if it helps you avoid making the same mistakes again, it's worth it. And if it requires that you do fewer exams in order to review the exams that you do in more depth, then it's worth doing.
A lot of students hear about the negation test for necessary assumption questions and think to themselves, this is great, it's going to solve everything. But the reality is it's a tool to be used with precision, it's not a blunt instrument. If you try to use it on every answer before you fully understand the argument, it's just going to lead to more confusion. The key is to slow down. First, you want to paraphrase the argument. Ask yourself, what's the conclusion, what's the support, and what's the gap? Once you've nailed that, the negation test becomes a spotlight. It shows you which answer, when negated, causes the whole argument to fall apart. But if you skip that key structural analysis, none of it's going to make any sense. The better your initial paraphrase, the more powerful the negation test will become.
There are some questions that are so hard that I can read it and just not even really understand what they said, even though all the words are in English. I guess it's hard for me to necessarily read a different stimuli in a way that I can understand them on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of making it real world relatable, like you were having a conversation with somebody. So reframing it, paraphrasing the stimulus in your own words, that's always going to be a good step to take. For any question you get wrong, for anything that gives you trouble, as part of your review process, articulate it for yourself. Write it out, talk it out with a friend or a coach or a tutor. Explain it the way you would explain to a 5-year-old. So really dumb it down and simplify it. If you can't explain it simply, then you probably don't get it well enough. And you want to do all this without even looking at the stimulus. So you read it, then you flip it over, you put it aside, and you ask yourself, can you articulate it in your own words?
There's nothing more frustrating than reading a logical reasoning argument, understanding all the individual words, but still thinking to yourself, what did I just read? That is not a vocabulary issue, it is a structure issue. The LSAT loves to use abstract, vague, formal-sounding language to disguise relatively simple arguments. The fix is to translate what you're reading. Don't reread the same sentence 5 times over, say it to yourself out loud in plain English. The moment you force yourself to simplify it, the more clear the logic becomes, and the correct answer will often jump out to you. So if a stimulus or an argument feels foggy or unclear, don't freeze, translate it like you're explaining it to a friend. So for example, don't say to yourself, most X's who participate in Y are not aware of Z. Instead, say to yourself, most people doing this thing don't even realize that something important is happening. Stay away from symbolic logic and ABC, XYZ as much as possible, and instead keep it as real world as possible. Hey, real quick guys, a lot of you have been asking me how you can be featured on one of these LSAT study breakdowns and get feedback on your approach. The only way is to join one of my LSAT coaching programs. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. And now, back to the show.
For me now, it's balancing study with full-time job. That's where I find the difficulty to balance both of those. But working from home, it's easier to study in the morning and maybe sometime at night, but it's hard to focus because I haven't studied in so long. So building that study stamina up, it's taking some time.
Yeah. So when you're having difficulty focusing on studying, what else is coming up instead?
So I have a big family at home. It's hard to study at home considering I have a newborn child at home because my sister just had a baby. So it's hard when you have so many people at home. I try to get in study time before everyone gets up, but it gets harder as the day progresses. But I try to get in at least 2 to 3 hours a day. I shoot for 5, but it ends up being 3 hours.
I could imagine that although it's difficult, it's also wonderful, but it's also difficult, but it's also wonderful. So everything is a mix. You mentioned that the afternoon becomes a bit more difficult. Maybe there's more activity, hustle and bustle going on in the house at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So that being said, which other times does that leave for you where you think you could really maximize your prep?
I usually start working at 9 o'clock. So I try to get in from 7 to 9, 2 hours there. And then I usually try to get in sometime at night after work around 5 to 7. And then if I don't get it from 5 to 7, I try to study at night, but it gets difficult at night to just focus on studying.
Sure. I can certainly understand that. For many people, the evening, you're tired. There's more people around. The evening is more often for socializing than is 7 in the morning. What can you do to create more productive study time? What can you do to get more time in the morning or to get more out of what you do in the morning?
Instead of waking up at 6, I would probably sleep earlier and try to wake up maybe an hour and a half earlier just to get, instead of getting 2 hours in, try to get maybe 3 to 3.5 hours in of productive studying. Because at that time, no one's awake. You're not socializing with anyone. No one's going to come into your room.
If you're juggling LSAT prep with a job and family, your time isn't just limited, it's fragmented. You've got 30 minutes here, maybe an hour there, and by the time you sit down to study at 8 p.m., your brain is cooked. The trick here is to protect your highest focus window. For a lot of people, that's early in the morning, before getting text messages, before work, before anyone else in the house is even awake. 1 solid hour at 6:30 a.m. might be worth more than 2 hours of interrupted distracted studying at night. So if your day is feeling pretty chaotic, that first hour might be the only hour that is solely under your control. Guard it, use it, and make the most of it.
When it comes to reviewing questions, right? Should you be reviewing only the wrong answers, or should you be reviewing in a sense like, okay, why did I get this right answer? Like, what's a good approach to review it whereas you're not wasting too much time and you don't want to cause burnout either?
Yeah, sure. So reviewing every single thing you do, period, would be a lot. You don't need to do it all, though. Think about where can you get value? Where can you gain understanding? So what you get wrong is obviously a prime candidate. Most people do think of that. The next, though, is what did you guess on and still got right? Because that could have easily gone the other way. So maybe it was a 50-50 guess when you were down to 2. Maybe it was some hesitancy, lacking confidence. Maybe your confidence level was a 6 out of 10. Not that high. I don't expect you to have 10 out of 10 confidence in everything when you're just studying, but 6 out of 10 or below, I'd say it's probably worth looking at more closely as well, even if you're guessing and got it right. And then there's also the ones where you ran out of time and you guessed and got it right, perhaps, where you ran out of time. Regardless, there's something that you maybe could have solved more efficiently at some point in the section.
When your LSAT prep time is tight, review might feel like a luxury because you just want to move forward onto the next section and onto the next exam. But review is where the real gains happen. If you're already putting in the work to take a section or take an exam, put in the extra effort to get the full benefits from that review process. Focus especially on the questions you got right but didn't feel totally sure of them, the ones you got wrong where you spent too much time, and of course, questions you skipped entirely. That's how you build real momentum, not just by doing more, but by learning from everything you've already done. Every question you get wrong is an opportunity to learn something new, so make the most of it.
Where the progress is happening is also where I am struggling the most, and that is in LR. I am able to take a complicated stimulus and reduce it to dinner table language, 10-year-old language. But what I cannot yet do is reduce it even further to variables that are succinct. Sometimes I have random questions. Is even if the same thing as if?
Even if is kind of like saying whether or not.
And how do you translate that in a logical reasoning sense? Whether or not. How do you translate that into formal logic?
not everything is a conditional, right? So some things are just irrelevant. For example, I play soccer even if it's muddy outside.
Okay, so I play soccer. So whether or not it's muddy is irrelevant.
Exactly.
I play soccer, and that's the end of the story.
I play soccer when it's muddy. Maybe I play soccer when it's not muddy. Probably do. But it's not a necessary or sufficient indicator. A lot of things are not necessary or sufficient. And that's how the LSAT gets you sometimes, because we get so involved in sufficient necessary framing that we start looking at everything as a conditional, when in reality, some things are just not conditionals.
Over-formalizing every argument in logical reasoning can majorly hurt your performance, because not every inference requires some huge chain of conditional statements. Sometimes the right answer is the obvious thing the argument was suggesting. So if you find yourself trying to diagram a question, then realizing halfway through that you're not even sure what you're tracking, pause, take a break. Go back and ask yourself, what's the argument? What do I know 100% for sure, and what is the author assuming? You don't need more symbols, you just need to understand the argument in front of you. That's what's going to get results, and there are no cheap tricks on a test like the LSAT.
You said that you could show me, was it where diagramming isn't necessarily effective, or was it something else?
Yeah, you're right. I did talk about that. So formal logic stimuli, where can we diagram? Where is diagramming useful? Where is diagramming not useful? The recommendation I have to tell the difference is basically, is this stimulus talking like a person might actually talk versus tons of conditional statements? So if you have a stimulus where there are tons of conditional statements and you see the same variables repeated again and again,
Yeah.
maybe it's the necessary one time, the sufficient another time,
Yeah.
you feel like, okay, maybe I'm going to want to do the contrapositive and link things together. That's a formal logic stimulus.
Yeah.
And that is one where diagramming might be useful.
Yeah. But a person doesn't talk like that. Is that what you're saying? And then if there's a stimulus where somebody is just talking, it probably isn't conditional logic because they're just talking.
Exactly. Some of this might be open to interpretation, but that's the broad strokes way that I think about each of these two types of stimuli, formal logic versus informal logic.
If somebody is just talking, there are always gaps in their logic because we all do that.
The reason that we all do that is because it's not really possible to articulate every single underlying assumption. That's why contracts are so long, because they're trying to delineate with bullet points every single possible contingency, everything that could possibly get in the way. In everyday life, we don't do that because it would take forever. So let's say you book this time on my calendar for 1:30 p.m. It's assumed that, let's say if you're sick or if I'm sick, we're going to let the other person know, because there's no way that I could know that you were sick or you could know that I was sick. So we need to explicate that. We need to make that explicit through an email, let's say. In contrast, if there were some major natural disaster that knocked out the internet worldwide, we would both understand, hey, the call over Zoom is probably not happening and we don't have any way to reach each other anyway. We do have underlying assumptions just baked into everyday life. And so informal logic stimuli could be said to contain a gap because they don't bother to make all of that explicit. So the question of whether a stimulus is fundamentally flawed or just contains a small gap is really based on whether we extend the principle of generosity or charity to the person making the argument. So are we saying that they're dumb or that they just didn't bother to make that explicit? There is one LSAT question, if you want to see an example of one that is formal logic that is a favorite of mine. It's from Prep Test 35, I think. And that's a question that has a couple of different variables. If you Google LSAT hominidae, you'll find it. That's one that is super formal logic based. Another rule of thumb is that only certain question types are going to involve formal logic. Inference questions often involve formal logic. Must be true questions.
Yeah.
But I mentioned inference because this is the family that contains more formal logic questions than any other. In contrast, strengthen, weaken, necessary assumption, I would never diagram those.
Okay, why would you not diagram a necessary assumption question?
Because it's not useful. First of all, they don't contain a lot of conditionals typically. Without a conditional, if you're diagramming, what are you really doing? You're writing down capital letters, but how do you connect them?
Okay.
In contrast with conditionals, we are taking contrapositives. We're linking them together into longer chains, and that's yielding some sort of result, like a math problem. But informal logic, like necessary assumption, strengthen, weaken, it just doesn't have that characteristic. That's not the right tool for the job. The tool for the job is looking at it critically. And then secondly is the negation test or denial test.
Yeah.
That's the proper tool. That's the proper technique for that question type.
Diagramming is not a substitute for thinking, and most logical reasoning questions aren't formal logic. They're conversational. So if it sounds like a real person might actually say it in conversation, diagramming probably won't help you. It could actually just slow you down further. So save diagramming for the rare cases where you're juggling multiple conditional statements, contrapositives, and multiple sufficient necessary condition setups. But for the rest of them, focus on paraphrasing the argument, identifying the flaw or the gap in it, and mentally locking in your prediction. That's faster and cleaner and more likely to lead to the right answer in the end.
Logical reasoning and reading comprehension seem to be areas where I'm usually about 9 to 11 questions in each section incorrect. And I'm trying to figure out what is that step that I'm missing for these things to click. I understand the idea that we're supposed to find the main conclusion of the argument, find the support, find out where a lot of that connects or doesn't connect, etc. I'm trying to take that next step.
Let me ask you this regarding logical reasoning. What does your question review process look like?
Yeah, I'm going back through a blind review, taking those questions that I did get incorrect, turning back around, reviewing those stimuli, and really trying to think about where I made the misstep. And usually I'm doing much better on a blind review with no time constraint. I'm seeing the same thing over at reading comprehension as well. Time constraint, I'm thinking, is a bit of a factor in there. The stress that happens when you see the ticker ticking down. But there is definitely a hole in that process. So I'm looking for the best advice you can give me on blind review, on understanding those questions and how best to take that next step.
I'm actually going to take it in a little bit of a different direction and share with you another review strategy that I've developed called the Socratic review method.
Okay.
Basically, the idea is that we're continually asking questions to get to the root of where your misunderstanding stemmed from. In logical reasoning, for example, you would ask, what about the stimulus gave you trouble? Was it that the conclusion was buried in the middle? Was it that there were annoying indicator words like unless, except, until, without? Were there no indicator words at all? Did you have to take contrapositives and link things together? Was the topic difficult? It could be any variety of things, but you got to figure out what about the stimulus gave you trouble, because it really does. A lot of it, at least, starts there. If you don't understand the argument, looking at the choices won't help you further. They'll only further confuse you.
Right.
With the question stem, there may be things like unfamiliar wording, but assuming that you've got a good sense of what the question type is, we have to look at the stimulus in depth as well as the answer choices in depth. And for the answer choices, you got to see what was tempting about the wrong answer that made you pick it and made it seem appealing, and what ultimately made it wrong. And what was discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately makes it correct. You have these traps of discouragement away from the right answer and traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer. And so that's the kind of analysis that you've got to do. And blind review, a lot of that is timed versus untimed, but regardless, a deep understanding is going to be important.
Blind review has its place, but it's not the end-all be-all. If you're still stuck in the 150s after weeks of blind review, it's time to go deeper. Start treating review like an investigation, not just an old habit you're going through for the sake of doing it. And you don't want to look at the right answer and think to yourself, okay, I see it now. You've got to ask yourself, why did the wrong answer seem right? What trick did I fall for? And why didn't I like the right answer initially? And track it. Use a spreadsheet. You will start to see your own personal LSAT traps. Maybe it's causation, or tricky phrasing, or choosing something that's just a little bit too strong. And when you spot your repeat mistakes, you can avoid making them the next time around, and that's where the real gains come from.
I do very well in all sections, especially in the first passages. How do I, through that time, as I get into the second and third and fourth passages and quarters of that LR section, number one, endurance. How do I keep my focus throughout that time? And number two, should I change the order in which I approach the test, maybe front-loading the harder questions? What's your strategy there?
Sure. So endurance, it's like a muscle. You get stronger by doing it more. So I would be doing lots of timed sections, lots of timed exams. That's the only way I can think of to build is by doing it. When it comes to order of approach, on average, I would do things in the order given. There's a cost in terms of jumping around, and I would never do the harder questions first because everything's worth the same. Within a passage, you might do the questions associated with that passage out of order. If you're planning to solve all 4 passages anyway, I don't see a lot of value in skipping one only to come back to it. But your mileage may vary. Try it out if you think it might help.
I want to take the opportunity to ask you, for a person that's scoring in the 150s on a pretty consistent basis, really been stuck in that area, with all the students you've trained and you've tutored over the years, is there a factor that you see a commonality between the students that are scoring in the 150s and are really having trouble to get out of there, and the students that are improving from the 150s into the 160s and beyond?
Yeah, sure. So I think 150s to 160s involves becoming proficient in the strategies for all sections and all question types. Then 160s to 170s involves a deeper analysis to understand why the strategies work. In cases where there are formulas, why do the formulas work? How were they derived and developed? And then becoming obsessed with knowing everything they can about this exam. So including what goes into constructing it, what goes into the various difficulty levels of different questions. So just developing an interest in psychometrics in general, the science of standardized exams, is really interesting. And the more you can learn about this exam, the better you'll do.
In the 150s, you probably know what a necessary assumption is, but to get into the 160s, you've got to be able to recognize one in under 10 seconds and avoid all the trap answers that feel tempting but don't work with the logic of the argument. That jump, that score increase, comes when you stop being a student of the LSAT and start becoming a technician. You see the gears turning underneath the questions, and you can start to see the exam from the test maker's perspective. And the only way to get there is to practice fewer things, but more deeply. Master one question type at a time until it's boringly obvious. That's going to be how you level up your understanding and get the score increases that go along with it.
How do I increase my speed while maintaining my accuracy? You know how sometimes you know what to do, but in the circumstance when you're under testing conditions, it's almost like being in a game and being trained to do something, and then sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, things don't always work out. You have to figure out how to keep forging ahead. So you said increasing speed while maintaining accuracy. Once the test starts, you've got to be ready to dive in.
Okay.
And keep moving forward. The speed and the accuracy, they go hand in hand, right? Obviously,
Of course.
if you could slow down, your accuracy could increase. But
Yes.
how could you go fast while maintaining it? Part of that is what I call pattern recognition.
Okay.
The idea that when you come across a question, you've seen it before. You've seen it
That's
in a
right.
different disguise before. I would encourage you, slow down for now. Take the time to thoroughly understand the patterns of reasoning so that when you come across it in the future, it's truly nothing new.
If you're the kind of student who tends to overthink things, here's a simple rule I give my students. A 2-minute max per question. If you hit that mark and you're still stuck, flag it, skip it, move on, come back to it later. This forces you to stay in motion. It keeps you from burning 5 minutes on one question, then rushing through the next 4. And what's wild is, when you come back to those flagged questions with a fresh perspective, you often see the correct answer in 20 seconds flat. It's not luck, it's just clarity with a fresh perspective. Time is a resource, so you want to spend it where the return's going to be highest.
I'm very tenacious. I don't know if it comes from academics. You like to be one of the top students, and so you believe in trying to do everything to the best of your ability, but it's test taking, it's not a classroom. It's just one shot, and you got a few minutes just to keep moving and use a strategy like Hunger Games and get through it. That's a weird analogy, but it's that way.
But there's actually something else I'm hearing coming up here, which
Okay.
is around perfectionism. Do you mind if we talk a little bit about that?
We can, because I have that tendency.
How could perfectionism come into play on the LSAT in both good ways and bad ways?
A tendency to ruminate when I don't have time. A tendency to second guess myself. A tendency to be too hard on myself because it can destroy one's efficacy if you read the passage and you're like, oh, I got to understand every word in it. I can't let it go. What's that word? Or you got the answer in a local question and you're like, wait a minute, are you doing too many setups? Like, one of the things I learned from your cheat sheets is that with the orientation questions, use that information to build and not feel like I have to do everything. So I think that it can destroy my efficiency.
It could. And that's why I brought this up, because I heard elements of that coming out. And of course, I've suffered from it as well at times too, which is why I'm so aware of it in others. Sometimes we see in others what we most need to work on ourselves as well. And so
Okay.
I bring this up because I could see it coming into play in your prep. And I want you to challenge yourself a little bit on it by recognizing it and saying, I'm fine getting questions wrong. I love getting questions wrong because I get to review those. The ones I get right, I don't look at those again unless they gave me trouble along the way.
I think that's it's ingenious, actually. It's an epiphany for me because in school, we're not taught to think that way. It's like a win-lose. Either you're good or you're bad. But if you look at it with a growth mindset, like you said, and say, okay, every time I make a mistake, I'm growing.
You're a teacher, right? What do you tell your students?
I tell them the same thing, but I don't take my advice. I don't take my own advice.
What if you took the idea that every question you got wrong was an opportunity to learn something new?
I'd feel a lot better. I'd feel liberated, actually. I know that sounds extreme, but I feel absolutely liberated. Yeah, I'm going to take that mindset. I'm going to switch it and say, that's my thought process now.
Love it.
Thank you.
If you're missing the last 5 questions of every section, but you're crushing the first 10, I've got news for you. You don't have a skill problem, you have a pacing problem rooted in perfectionism. The LSAT punishes hesitation, not because you're wrong, but because you run out of time to be right. The fix is to start trusting your gut on the easy questions that feel straightforward. Don't second guess yourself on those. Yes, they are as easy as they seem. You don't want to reread a simple main point question 4 times. Don't talk yourself out of your first instinct. Learn to bank time early in the section so you can spend it later where it really matters. Hey, real quick guys, if you're just getting started with your LSAT prep or you're looking for a quick refresher, you can grab your free easy LSAT cheat sheet linked below this video. It's jam-packed full of concrete actionable tactics you can take and apply to your LSAT prep right away for a quick score boost, and it's 100% free, so you can grab your copy below. And now, back to the show.
I have like bits and pieces of the LSAT already done, like studying wise. And now that I'm trying to be more consistent, I feel like I don't really know which bits and chunks I've already memorized and what I don't have memorized. So what would you say as a tutor, what's the best way to see where have you backtracked in your studying? What's the best way to know what you already know and what you need to work on after someone who's taken time off?
Yeah, sure. So I'll push back a little bit and ask you, let's say we weren't having this conversation. How would you figure it out? What's the simplest thing you could do?
Take the test.
Take a test, take a practice test. Just take a diagnostic. I don't recommend cold diagnostics because they can often be discouraging, but you've been at it for a while already. You just want to know, what do you have down? What might you be rusty on? And what might you need to cover from scratch? And so take a diagnostic, see how you do. And obviously with a grain of salt, knowing that you will get more fresh on it as you get back into the swing of things.
Definitely. That makes sense. Yeah. I have been studying out of the LSAT trainer. I think I'm like halfway done with the book. I feel like the material is just so dry. Do you feel like other students have this problem where they feel like it's so dry and that when they read it, I feel like it's just not sticking or I'm not trying hard enough or I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Books can get a little bit overwhelming at times when they're hundreds and hundreds of pages long. Even a great book can get boring because it's about the LSAT, right? So maybe you want to change it up a little bit. I mean, now there's all these videos out there. Videos in general can be a lot more engaging. Back when I was studying, I would have to reward myself after every single chapter of a book by watching Chappelle's Show. Every single chapter, okay, I've got another episode of Chappelle's Show coming up. I'm just gonna watch that as like my carrot and stick thing. That was the carrot. That was what kept me moving forward. And so maybe you want to set up little rewards for yourself, or maybe you want to change it up completely. You need little bite-sized rewards, especially these days with internet, social media. We're used to a lot more stimulation than what you get out of a book. And the LSAT can be pretty dry sometimes.
I love that.
Take that diagnostic, target your weak areas. You don't need to work through any resource from cover to cover. Pick the specific areas that you need to focus on and then dive deep on that. So for example, if you're good on inference questions, but
Yeah.
weekend questions give you trouble, then target weekend questions. Doesn't even matter necessarily which resource you use, as long as it's, of course, a high quality resource. But you might also want to look at multiple resources to see what each one has to say on that exact topic, and you'll see what sticks for you.
That's so true. Because before, my mindset was just like, all right, I guess I gotta read each section for this and this, because then I have a complete knowledge of it.
When your LSAT prep starts to feel stale, it's not because the material changed, it's because the way you're engaging with it got too repetitive, so you're going to want to switch it up. If books aren't working for you anymore, try videos. If videos aren't working anymore, try live one-on-one coaching or semi-private coaching sessions. Do a 5-minute micro drill instead of a full-time section. Or maybe you set a 10-minute timer and do just one reading comp passage to try and beat the clock. You don't have to love the LSAT, but you do need to keep it engaging enough that you'll keep coming back to it regardless of how you're feeling. Consistency beats intensity every single time. And if switching it up helps you stay consistent, that's not cheating, that's just prepping smarter.
I was averaging like 158s to 162. I wanted to get in the 160s for the test. I don't really know what happened. I did not get that, but I'm hoping to get a 165 or better on the next one. So I read how your best strategy is to do an everyday plan exactly. So I was hoping we could make one of those together.
If you underperformed on test day, it doesn't mean you're not capable of hitting your goal. It just means something broke down in your execution, but not in your understanding. That's where we shift the focus from the content of the exam to your mindset, because you already know the logic of the LSAT. Now, it's about replicating your best performance under your worst test day pressure. That means more timed sections, more test day simulation, and rebuilding your confidence one section, one exam at a time.
Do you feel like you're still lacking kind of in all areas?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But do you have a proficiency in the different types of logical reasoning questions?
It varies, but for some weird reason, I get the easier ones wrong, like the main point questions or strengthening questions, which I, in the beginning, was doing so well, and then I think I just didn't focus enough on them, and then now they're lagging behind.
Okay, so you might want to do a couple of exams over the next couple of weeks, just to see if there is a particular trend. Take note of that.
Okay, so how many exams do you think I should be doing a week?
What are your other obligations right now?
School.
Sure. All right. In that case, I would suggest you do at most 2 full-length 5-section timed exams per week between now and test day.
Okay.
No more than that, because you can't really afford to do more given schoolwork, and more than that might not be useful anyway. But 2 per week, spaced out, not on consecutive days, and then detailed review of those exams.
Okay.
And make those the most recent exams, ideally those from the 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But also save a handful of those new exams to do for a potential retake. So you might do even numbered ones now, and then save the odd numbered ones if you were hypothetically going to potentially retake in the future. But over the next couple of weeks, note if there are any particular weak areas that jump out, like certain logical reasoning question types. And if there are, you might do some drilling on those types or read some foundational material on those types. At a certain point, it may not be about question types anymore, because once you know strengthen, you know strengthen. At that point, you might just be getting difficult questions wrong because they're difficult. And that's where detailed review comes in.
When I'm not doing tests, I should still be doing 3 times section a day, right? But like separate them. I don't have to do them all in a row.
That's a great question. So let's say hypothetically you're doing your full-length exams on Monday and then on Thursday, hypothetically. You could then spend Tuesday reviewing. Wednesday, you might drill some weak areas. You might do 2 individual sections back to back. Thursday, another full-length exam. Friday, review of that exam. Saturday, drill weak areas. Maybe Sunday, you take the day off or work on schoolwork, something like that. Yes, short answer is on your off days, you could do 2 timed sections or 3 timed sections back to back. But the question is why? What are you hoping to get out of it? Go into it with a plan that you want to work on pacing, or you want to work on endurance, or you want to maybe try out a new strategy.
When someone who normally crushes strengthening questions and main point questions suddenly starts missing them, it's not a comprehension issue, it's a review gap. You might know the skill, but maybe you haven't reinforced it recently. And when you get tired on test day, that muscle memory fades. The solution is to reinforce the basics. Spend a few days doing nothing but strengthen and main point questions so much that they become boring to you again because you're so good at them. When the fundamentals are sharp, your floor rises, and that's what cushions you on the days when the test feels just a bit harder than usual, maybe for no reason other than the stress of knowing it's the actual day itself. That's how you avoid your worst case scenarios on test day and perform at your best.